All right, welcome to The Explainer. Today we're tackling a topic that's, well, it's difficult, but it's so important. We're going to be exploring this really powerful framework for healing called The Pivot. It's a workbook designed to offer a path to freedom for men who are navigating the silent struggle with problematic sexual behavior. And right from the get-go, the journey begins with this dedication. It immediately sets this incredible tone, not of judgment, but of just profound empathy. It's a powerful way to say, hey, we see you, to the millions who face this completely alone, in secret.
Now, to make this whole journey feel a bit more real, we're going to follow the story of a guy named James. He's a composite character, but his experiences, they mirror what so many men in recovery go through. And his story really gets to the heart of what you see here. This isn't about being a bad person. It's about being in pain.
So, where does a journey like this even start? Well, it begins with phase 1, the awakening. This is that first, huge step. It's that moment of gut-level honesty where, as the workbook says, the fog of secrecy finally starts to lift. It's the first of 3 big movements in this whole process.
Okay, first things first, let's get clear on what we're actually talking about. The workbook defines problematic sexual behavior, or PSB, and what's so important is that it's not a label meant to shame anyone. It's just a way to describe any pattern of sexual thought or action that feels out of your control and is causing real harm.
Now this is so interesting because it maps out the engine that's driving the whole thing. It's called the trauma addiction cycle. Let's walk through it with James. For him, it all started with pain, this deep, unmet need for connection. Then, something triggers that pain, maybe stress at work. That leads to an escapist fantasy that promises some kind of relief. And that fantasy leads to acting out, which works for a minute. But then comes the crash, this wave of self-hatred and shame. And guess what? That just restarts the whole cycle. Understanding this is a game changer because it reframes the whole issue. It's not a moral failing, it's a predictable pattern. And if it's predictable, it can be interrupted.
And that leads us to this crucial question, right? Because the workbook proposes this simple, powerful truth. You just can't change a pattern you can't see. So the very first step is to name it, to drag it out of the secrecy where it has all its power and bring it into the light.
And to do that, to bring it into the light, the workbook gives you this amazing tool called the 3 circles. It's a really simple but powerful way to map out what recovery looks like. Your inner circle, that's the destructive stuff you need to stop, period. The middle circle is for those risky, slippery situations you need to be aware of and avoid. But maybe most important is the outer circle. That's for all the healthy, life-giving things you can do to actively support your recovery. So, you've had this awakening. You're starting to see the patterns. You've got a tool like the 3 circles. What's next? Well, now the journey moves into phase 2, the turning. And this is where the focus shifts from just what you're doing to the much deeper question of why.
And a critical distinction here is understanding the difference between coping and healing. Look, coping behaviors like acting out, they're all about numbing the pain. They give you some short-term relief, sure, but healing, that's totally different. Healing is about actually turning toward that pain to resolve it for good, which leads to real, long-term wholeness.
And, at the very root of this whole struggle, you often find shame. This quote just nails it. Shame tells you, I am something wrong. It's this deep, toxic belief that you, at your core, are flawed. That's so different from guilt, which says, I did something wrong. One is about your identity, the other's about your behavior.
So if you're gonna face that shame, you have to be willing to ask this really tough but absolutely vital question. The whole turning phase is basically an invitation to dig up and challenge those distorted core beliefs that have been fueling the cycle, sometimes for your entire life.
The workbook points to 4 really common beliefs that tend to take root early on. For our guy James, it was that first one, the belief that he was fundamentally unworthy. And that lie drove him to hide his true self and look for validation in sex, which of course just reinforced the deeper lie that he couldn't be loved for who he really was.
Okay, so after awakening to the truth and turning to face those core beliefs, the journey hits its final phase, becoming. This is all about integrating these new truths into your actual daily life. It's about consciously choosing to live as the man you are becoming, not the man you've been. And this is where the rubber really meets the road. The work becomes a daily practice. The focus shifts from just trying to manage a behavior to proactively building a life of integrity, a life where your actions finally start to line up with your deepest values.
A huge part of this phase is building a solid, sustainable relapse prevention plan. And look, this isn't about a bunch of rigid rules. It's a practical roadmap for staying connected and staying grounded when those old patterns inevitably try to pull you back in.
For James, this was a massive breakthrough. He learned that real strength wasn't about trying to tough it out alone. It was about reaching out. This slide just captures it perfectly. Connection is the antidote. It's the one thing that can truly disrupt that cycle of isolation and fantasy where these behaviors thrive.
Ultimately, this quote really sums up the whole goal. This phase is about reclaiming your own identity. It's not about becoming some totally new person. It's about shedding all those layers of shame and failure to finally uncover the true self that's been buried under it all along.
So, we've walked through these three huge phases: awakening, turning, and becoming. What's the big takeaway from this whole journey? When you boil it all down, what does it all mean? It all comes down to this. The central idea of the workbook, the reason it's called the pivot, is that healing, well, it isn't some finish line you cross one day. It's a series of small, courageous shifts in direction, a daily pivot that you make every single day toward a life of integrity and wholeness.
So in the end, this entire process is really an invitation. It's a call to stop running from your story and to start rewriting it with honesty, with community, and with hope. And it leaves all of us with this one final, really powerful question to think about.